All right. Welcome. I am here with Professor Groneman. Hi.
Hi.
Who is one of Normandale's faculty in music. And we are going to talk a little bit about music and writing and ways of creating knowledge in the discipline of music. So thank you very much for being here, Rob.
Always a pleasure.
All right. So can you just get us started? A nice and easy question. How did you get into your discipline?
That's a fantastic question. Musicians, generally speaking, determine that they want to follow this discipline from a very young age. Oftentimes, they are given lessons at a young age for perhaps the piano or the violin or other such instruments. And we just, for whatever reason, we just fall in love with music, the production of music, the performance of music, listening to music. It quickly hits us. And my situation was different. All right. So I didn't come into loving music until I was, I don't know, 15 years old, to the point where I knew I wanted to be a pianist. Um, my parents couldn't afford the piano lessons growing up or a piano. So I would go over to my friend's house and I would watch him practice. He had lessons from Miss Kapitsky, and he would take a different bus on Mondays and he would go to his lesson. And after listening to him play, I realized, all these pieces he was playing, all this music he was playing is based on simple patterns. And one day I said, "Can I try?" And he said, "Well, can you try? You don't have lessons." And I sat down and played his music for him from memory because I was understanding the patterns that were in the music. And that was telling to me that if I understood patterns, I don't think I need to know have the lessons. And so I started teaching myself to play. My mother was able to take me down to the downtown public library where they have a huge collection of scores and LPs and a 9-foot grand piano. And so she would take me there in the summers and dump me off. And I would spend all day at the library exploring scores, studying scores, learning music. And pretty soon I had quite a repertoire. Well, it happened to be that I was at Schmidt Music with my mother. We were picking out some shoes for my sister. And I decided I was going to go into the Schmidt Music. And I sat down and started playing Claire de Lune, which is a very famous piece. And it caught, the piano teacher who was standing down the hallway came. His name is Dick Danaher. He came over and he said, "Kid, where'd you learn to play like that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I mean, it's just a bunch of patterns. I taught myself how to play it." He goes, "No." He couldn't believe this. And so he said, "You know what? Maybe you want to take lessons with me." I said, "No, my mother wouldn't allow it." And he said, "Okay, well, um, why don't you come by next week and I'll give you a consultation lesson and then maybe we can talk to her." And so we did that. It turns out he's a jazz teacher. And I brought in all of my classical scores, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, all these different composers, Beethoven. And I showed him what I was working on. He said, "Kid, I can't help you with any of that, but I can teach you how to play Duke Ellington." And so I did that for a little while and then decided that that wasn't for me. I wanted to play Beethoven. And so, like so many students, I quit. And then, over the course of time, eventually one has to choose, to go to college. So after high school, I was intent at not following the traditional ride to college. Instead, I wanted to run a table saw in a cabinet shop. And so I found out really quickly that, well, you can't get experience without experience, right? It's that age old circular problem with careers. And so I tried the cabinet shop. That was a fail. I tried selling knives. That was a fail. I tried selling storm sashes and awnings. That was a fail. And so I wound up going to college. And I had to pick a major. And I was looking at the majors that you could choose from, and music happened to be one of them. I thought, interesting. And so that's how I found my music theory teacher. That's how I found my piano teacher. And that is where I discovered that I really want to be in the classroom. I want to teach these patterns to others so that music making is more efficient. It's less practice and more of a problem solving task than it is a something where we have to practice for tens of thousands of hours on one thing just to get that to work. And so that's how I found myself in music, and especially in academia. Um, when I was in my undergraduate, I was studying with a professor named Duncan McNabb. And Dr. McNabb, at the end of the undergraduate program, he had asked me about grad school and tried to convince me that the story's not over. And he was absolutely right. The story was not over. And through that, I was given an assistantship position at the University of Minnesota. And so tuition was basically nothing.
Hmm.
And I discovered classroom teaching in academia. And I learned very quickly that this is something that I can do. And from there, the jobs just kind of opened up. Because I had so much experience teaching at that point.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
yeah.
I love the thing about your story about how college was not your first choice, and it was only after a series of failing at other things that you ended up at college. I think that's a great reminder for all of us about the paths that we have available.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
and some people find their major, they find their passion when they get to college and they take that English class, and wow, Professor Miller was amazing. I want to do that. I want to be a better writer, and then we find that that's how we move along. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So when you are, I know you talked a little bit already about your goal for teaching music, helping students identify patterns and making it easier to produce music. What would you say the goal is for the discipline of music as a whole?
Wow. Um, that's a really big question. I think the goal of music as a whole um, is to have audiences and to perform that music. That's why in the music department we are performance based. All of our, excuse me, courses are somehow performance based. The entire AFA is based on performance based courses. So, and
Can
that's
I stop
important.
you? Sorry. Can you tell us what the AFA is? So some of the students here might not know what that stands for.
Oh, sorry. At Normandale, we love our acronyms.
We do.
Associate of Fine Arts in Music.
Thank you.
It's a 2-year associate degree.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so the goal of that degree is to uh, help the student develop the best performance skills so that when they transfer, they can demonstrate that they're commensurate young professionals.
Excellent. Um, all right. So as this next question is another big question, but is there a certain point of view that your discipline takes? Biology might have a scientific point of view. Disciplines like, welding or, sort of the mechanical disciplines might have a trade centered point of view. Is there a point of view that music has?
The ones that you listed parenthetically are scientific, aesthetic, human-centered, and trade-centered, etc. And I would say that music fits all of those categories. It is certainly scientific. Instruments have construction, and the construction allows us to manipulate those instruments and produce the tone that can be acknowledged in an aesthetic environment for human-centered purpose of enjoyment, and it's trade-centered for all of us who are in the business. We have to be self-advocators. We have to be accountants, marketers. We have to be um, at all of the things that we do in music have some sort of business aspect of it, with the exception of showing up to the gig. Um, so yeah, we have to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so and that's something that's really hard um to begin to teach, because many students that find themselves in a music discipline don't realize that they need to learn how to do their own accounting. They need to learn how to save their receipts and categorize them and enter them into QuickBooks. They don't realize that they have to be a marketer, or that they have to eventually at some point start looking for gigs and failing at them in some cases and trying different things. So there's a lot to it. It's not just you passed the test and you got the degree. And at many four-year institutions, those things are just simply not being taught. And
Oh.
so for our AFA, we make sure that our students have some experience with doing the accounting, running the business. And yeah, so I find that it's terribly important, because I ran my own business for 10 years before I set foot in a classroom. I was prepared for all of that. As a matter of
Mhm.
fact, we had a pedagogy course where the instructor had us, or was telling us about the music business and how to start a studio and this sort of thing. And I was amazed. I'm like, don't we already know how to do that? And it turns out that all the students in the class, not one of them had done their own books. Not one of
Okay.
them had done their own marketing. So yeah, we have to be able to wear all these different hats. And I think it's important um, for students to know that not everything that you learn in a program, um, the there are other parts of a discipline that often aren't taught in school. And so my advice is to, if you a student, your students are interested in a specific field, find people that are in that field, surround yourself by them so that you get an idea about what it's like to actually uh, be in that field on a daily basis.
It seems like this is especially important for music because, the popular perception of music is that it's this artistic passion, right? And that it's an art, not a science, not a business, right? You do this. And the reminder that it is all of them, right? It's a science, it's an art, it's a business. Like that I think that's a great reminder for students. Um
Mhm.
is there, so a certain point of view, we just talked about, is there a certain question that music seeks to answer?
I missed that. The
I'm sorry,
internet.
did I cut out? Okay, so sorry. The next question, is there a certain question that the discipline of music seeks to answer?
Wow. You're not making these questions easy.
Sorry.
Uh, there are thousands of questions for certain, but I would say that the best answer to that is how, question mark. How did, how am I going to play this music? How am I going to study this music? How am I going to find time to practice enough to be prepared? How am I going to get to the gig? We're always asking the question, how? How did, and perhaps even why? Why did Beethoven write that specific note? Those are not esoteric questions. They are very important. We talk about disciplines. My main discipline is music theory, and my job within that specific subset of music is to help students understand the why part of it and the how part of it. And so it's very important to ask the question, why is there a G flat in that measure? Because it's important. It's important to know. If a composer took a lot of time thinking about which precisely which notes should be put into an order, then as a performer, I am obligated to try to unlock that, to try to, drill into that question of why is this that way, or how is it that way? Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you. So you've talked about how music theory is your specialty, and so music theory is this sort of, I don't want to say broad category, but is there a specific theory within that area of music that is particularly important?
Okay, that really depends on who you ask. But if I had to say for myself, I think that number one, you have to know who you're teaching. Okay, so when I do my own professional work, um, I have this other hat on. When I'm in the classroom, I have to take that hat off some of the times because my students are at a different level and I have to meet them where they're at and then lift them up and bring them along. And during that journey, sometimes I like to get out the hat and put it on and show them how deep the rabbit hole can go. So I am considered to be what is called a Shankarian theorist, and that is to say that I follow the teachings of this Heinrich Schenker, who was active early in the 20th century, but he unlocked a huge component of what he called Masterwerken der Musik, or the masterpieces of music. And he showed us that there's one true master pattern that these masterworks all have in common. And he showed us how to understand that. And again, once that, because of my pattern minded, learning, once I saw that, I was sold. Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. I took a music theory class in high school, and then I would love to take another one because it's been a long time. But yeah, I remember loving it, and I would love to learn more.
Mm.
Um, so, what types of information is important in your discipline?
Uh, well, for certain facts. So on day one of music theory, I usually tell my students something like, well, if you're in music theory, you're taking the wrong course. This should be called music fact. Because theory is theory, right? Um, in music theory, we look at data, which the data points are the facts. We gather the facts and the data, and that helps us try to understand the story. We do experiments. We look at the case studies. Um, we look at various theoretical positions. There's not always one answer to some of the questions. And of course, we consider best practices when it comes to musculoskeletal health, vocal health, as well as what am I trying to say? Uh, as well as technical practice. So we kind of put everything together. It's amazing, like the AFA, the associate degree, hits us from all sides. We get hit by the historical data, we get hit by theoretical. We train our ears to hear sound better, and then of course we train ourselves to play instruments at the best level that we can. Um, yeah. So
Musicians really do it all.
yeah, we have to. It
Yeah.
it makes assessment look a little strange. And for those of you who are listening to this interview, we do assessment, which sounds like it's just grading, an essay or something, but we also assess what it is that we're trying to accomplish and whether or not our assignments that we're giving are really truly accomplishing those goals. Well, our students are doing assessment every single day they work and come to school and hopefully at home. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
Can I make one more point at that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Let's see. How do I put this into words that are um, not NASM, that aren't uh, accreditation language? Let's see. The entire discipline is based on what we call the common body of knowledge. I know that sounds weird or cryptic. It sounds like something like Doctor Who or Spock would say, but it means all of the music at once. So we can think of it as almost like a gestalt, or there's not one thing you can take out of the discipline without affecting all the others. All It doesn't matter. All the music from all over the world can be described on the following traits. Melody, harmony, rhythm, pitch, dynamics, articulation, instrumentation, and form. That's that's it. But if you can imagine that the discipline of music is not just linear, like we write on a piece of paper, we read across and then the next line. No, it's more like a giant cube where all these things fit together.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm.
So what are some consequences of things that music has done in the world or for the world?
Um, I think that when I read that question, I really had to kind of think um, deeply about it. I suppose I would say, from the standpoint of music, music has always been a reflection on the world. Take, for example, the song For What It's Worth, um, or Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Um, with the Ninth Symphony, uh, he composed it as a reflection on the sublime of man's of the human experience on earth, and then the human experience uh, in heaven, for instance. And he takes those two constructs and he clashes them together. Why did he do that? Because people were learning to think as humanists at the time, and this was his reflection upon that. So I think that music, you know, imitates life.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
great. Um, what is unique about the way that people write in your discipline? I like this. This is a good question, I think, for musicians, music in
Okay.
particular.
Okay, yeah. This one I want to share a screen. Okay. There are like four people in the world that are going to be able to read this. Okay, I'm going to show you what I think like when I'm looking at music.
Okay.
Okay, so what you're seeing here is called a graphic analysis. And this paper that I wrote that I never got to present because of COVID
Oh,
um, deals with this one note right here. My question was, why is that note there? Because it's very out of place. And so as I was doing the research, this gets back to your other question. I was considering all implications of everything. I discovered that as I begin to drill into this and begin to peel the layers back, I discovered that what the true meaning of it is, um, is down here, where I've reduced all of that information into the smallest possible place that it can be contained. And once I was able to do that, I was able to solve the problem. And I was able to take a position that is way far from the common position about what that G flat is for. And I was ready to present this at a music theory conference because it is kind of a breakthrough. I was kind of excited.
yeah.
So what you're seeing here is an example of the writing. So this uh, these musical staff examples, these are called graphs. This is how Shankarian thinks when analyzing music, when learning music too. And so what we seek to do is to try to figure out the source material that the composer was using. And I was able to do that. It took months, but I was able to do that. Once I figured it out, I was able to write the paper and ready to present it. But we're not just squares in music theory. I mean, it can be fun too. If I read you this passage, it says, question about the G flat. It could be a red herring for a retransition, a ruse, an impostor. Dominant in F minor is in fact represented. However, C major, that is heavily tonicized. An argument that refutes this notion. Okay, we can have fun with it too, and and kind of use our language. Uh, Even though it looks kind of strange on paper, when you actually read it as a story, then it can really help to bring it to life. Because if it doesn't have life, why would an audience really care? So I don't know. I really love this about my discipline, that we can have fun with it. And we can make levity of very heavy topics. And certainly in class, I that's one of my I really try one of my in my teaching philosophy, I believe that there has to be some room for levity.
Excellent. I just want to like as someone who is teaching this integrated reading and writing class, I do want to like point out to the students who are watching this, right, that reading music is another form of literacy, right? Reading music is a completely different skill than reading a novel or reading a short story or a textbook article, and that so even more basically than what Rob is talking about, how even just the staff notation is another really fascinating way to read and write in the discipline of music, that many of you, especially if you're watching this, are able to do. So you do have that literacy.
Yeah, and speaking of music notation, let me show you a piece that I'm presenting tomorrow at the workshop. Let's see.
All right. Um, so uh, the last two questions have to do with advice that you would give students. So the first one of these is, what advice would you give students who would like to pursue a major in the discipline of music?
Mm, I would say be realistic. You're not going to start at the top. I started at the bottom, and we have to be realistic. Um, most musicians that are not already well on their way to playing competition level, international competition level, don't make it there, okay, without an enormous amount of hard work. So yes, be realistic, plan on carving out the time to do it right, even if that means uh, not taking that extra job, even if it means sacrifice of something that you want to do. I can't tell you how many times my friends in college would be going out west skiing, and I couldn't do that. I had to stay home and practice because of the concert that's coming up, or because of this or that. Um, you know, I knew friends in college that would go to parties on the weekend. Musicians can't do that for all kinds of reasons. We need to be in the practice room on Friday night, Saturday night. Um, and so, yeah, my advice, the other part of this is do it, get involved in as many types and styles of music as possible, and don't pigeonhole yourself into one, pet project area. Be diverse. Diversity is extremely important, um, for musicians, especially. An example of that is I did not want to play Duke Ellington with Dick Danaher. Okay. I wanted to play Rachmaninoff. And so I stuck to my guns on that. And I didn't take the opportunity to learn to play popular music and jazz. And that came back to haunt me. I can't say how many gigs did I turn down because I just don't know how to play that music. How many opportunities, slipped away because I didn't take advantage of that. So we really, at Normandale, try to encourage our students to, even if you're not comfortable, even if it's out of your comfort zone, still try, even if there's a possibility of failing. Um, Music students also kind of freak out when it comes to making mistakes on stage. But you know what? Professionals make mistakes all the time. Assessment's very challenging because a, a piano piece might have tens of thousands of notes, and on stage missing one or two of those notes is terrifying experience, and we feel like failures. And so that attitude has to be checked at the door. We have to be willing to get up and fail in front of our peers, because we're all, the last thing I'll leave you with here is, when it comes to music, expect when you show up on the first day that you're already in a room with your friends. These are all people that want to be there, and they all have different stories to tell. And so learn about those stories, and love, love thy neighbor in music. They may be your stand partner, you know. And so yeah, that's a I think, being able to take risks is a place where you can be in college. This is a place to experiment, college is, and for music anyhow, the discipline. And so, this is the time to do it. And yeah, so be realistic and don't be afraid to take risks and be diverse. Learn. Oh, then there's one more, one more very important thing. Don't hit people over the head with your complicated music theory language. Okay, know your audience. Uh, we have very complex topics that we cover in college level music theory, and So at the end of a class period, sometimes I will say, okay, now let's talk about this as a dinner party conversation, or an elevator conversation. Could you communicate what it is that we just did over the last hour in the simplest way possible? In the same way that I showed you that paper, it's actually very simple. Um, but the journey to get to that point of being able to synthesize the language and then express it is sometimes a long one. Um, I think knowing what not to say sometimes is as important as knowing what to say. Kind of like that old expression that, a true gentleman can play the bagpipes, but a true gentleman doesn't.
Chooses not to. Yeah.
Chooses not to, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
Um,
those are my
it's
remarks.
that last thing that you said is interesting because we talk in our writing classes about how it's very easy to directly quote someone, but it's much harder to paraphrase them because you have to demonstrate understanding and you have to be able to say it in your own words, and that requires that you understand it and that you're not just parroting their language back. And so I think that yeah, that definitely relates to what you just said.
That's why I have a stuffed parrot in my classroom. And we I love it when I'll be talking about something, and as you know how it is, as you're going along and you're talking, you're kind of thinking ahead a little bit. And then sometimes I'll be wondering, am I getting to them? Am I expressing this in the best way possible? And I'll turn around, there'll be a hand up, and it'll be Nick, for instance. And he'll say, are you just saying that this and this makes that? Yeah, pretty much. That what he
Yep,
said. Let's all write down what Nick said.
that was good. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes the students will know how to say it in a better way, and I think it's important as instructors that we listen to what they have to say too, and remember that.
The last question, I imagine that some of this advice is probably similar to the advice you'd give students studying, choosing to major in music, but is there any additional advice that you have for someone who is pursuing music as a career?
Yeah, once again, you have to be realistic. Number two, you have to be able to wear a lot of hats. Uh, for a career in music, our career, okay, I think I can put this easily. Imagine for a second a quilt of all these different scraps of fabric that you have around. Those scraps are your musical experiences, and it's very important to know how to sew them together to have a patchwork career. So I always tell my students, expect to do some teaching, expect to do some playing, expect to do some business related work, and expect to hopefully work for other people initially. And what don't expect to be given that big break until you've proved yourself um, in many different areas. Um, yeah, that's the best advice I can give anyone that is going into this wonderful field, is to take as many opportunities as possible so that you can get those. And I hate the idea of resume building, as a concept. Although, let's face it, we have to.
Right.
And we have to be able to document our experiences. And the more that resume starts to, starts with a broad base and kind of goes towards the top pyramid, where your goal, let's say my goal was to teach at Normandale Community College. Well, I've got to be able to, I start, with my own business first, and then, become a private contractor for a music store, Schmidt Music. And then from there, uh, college, teaching assistant, and then first professor job at McPhail Center for Music, and then Normandale, and then Normandale Music Theory. Yeah, so I didn't start as a full-time professor. I started with all of these part-time experiences, and eventually that threading those together, we find ourselves, reaching our goal. And then our goal starts to, like magnets, you push them together and the one shoots out and your goal changes, becomes greater. So,
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for taking the time to talk with me and to talk with our my writing students, our writing students in integrated reading and writing. We really appreciate it, and we really the advice and the insights that you've given here will be really helpful for them. So thank you very much.
all right, enjoy. This was fun. You're next.